Hello everyone, my name is Christian. Welcome to my hobby blog. Today we are doing another Vinegar Syndrome October 2022 subscription package review. Today we are going to be doing a movie that I don't have as many notes on as I did the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. That ended up being an hour and a half, that review. I did not plan that. I was just writing down notes, stuff that I really wanted to talk about. And it just kept going. And I just kept talking. And when I noticed that the initial kind of reaction to that release wrapped up around the 30-minute mark, that's when I knew that it was going to be my longest video in terms of the Vinegar Syndrome reviews. But this one will be back to the standard, probably 10 to 15 minutes. This is one that I don't really have too many thoughts on the movie itself, but more about the star of this film. And the movie that I'm talking about is a film from 1971, directed by Leon Klimovsky, who has done many cult films, and it stars the ultimate Jacinto Molina. I think I said his name right. Most commonly known as Paul Naschy. And the film I'm talking about today is The Werewolf vs. Vampire Woman. This movie has a lot of behind the scenes going on. One of my favorite special features on this release is, of course, the documentary called The Man Who Saw Frankenstein Cry, I believe is the name of it. Yes. And the subtitle for that film, or for that documentary, is Paul Naschy, the Life and Legend of a Horror Icon. And it is 80 minutes long. It's a full-length documentary. And if you haven't seen, this is what the standard theatrical art looks like. But that documentary is, I think, the perfect documentary. It is perfect length. It is not an hour or shorter in length. It covers from the moment of his birth, and obviously they don't go into super detail about each phase of his life, but they go from the moment that he is born all the way to his death, using archival footage, photographs from him growing up. They use historical footage from news and reporters and kind of guerrilla filmmakers, because Paul Naschy, that name doesn't really give much of who the man behind the name Paul Naschy was. A lot of people, such as John Landis and Joe Dante and everyone else who was interviewed in the documentary, they talk about how they had no idea that Paul Naschy was a Spanish actor, because he did, I think he was born in Madrid, Spain. And they talk about throughout the entire documentary about how he grew up during the Spanish Civil War and watched the dictatorship sort of become the main form of government. And he and his mother, after the death of his father, they ran away to a different city and were hiding in homes from the gunfire and explosions. And one day, a soldier busted into the home, and before the soldier shot them, Paul Naschy, or Jacinto, I need to check his name again, but, because I feel like I'm saying it wrong, but, Jacinto, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Molina, yes. I had to make sure I had the name right. He was about 5 or 6 years old at this point, and he saw the soldier's face. And it ended up being his father, who he thought was murdered during the kind of initial outbreak of the Civil War. And watching him, well, not him, but watching people recount quotes that he said about the time growing up during this period, it was so effective and very mood setting for me in terms of his career, because he was not overly successful. I liken him, and the documentary does too, I liken Paul Naschy to a figure like Boris Karloff or Bela Lugosi or even Lon Chaney, an actor who was always in makeup playing a creature such as the werewolf, Dracula, the mummy, so on and so forth. And this documentary is definitely what makes this release so good, in my opinion. Because the movie itself, which I haven't really talked about the movie yet, but I thought the movie was just okay. But watching the documentary, you really develop a sense of appreciation for this weird werewolf versus vampire woman story. And this entire movie was made as a way to capitalize on the horror movie monsters, the Hammer horror monsters. So this movie was originally called like the Werewolf's Shadow, and they were like, yeah, that's not a gripping enough title for a movie. So what we're going to do is we're gonna say Werewolf versus Vampire Woman, and in the U.S., I believe, it was released as Frankenstein versus well, not Frankenstein, but the Wolfman versus Dracula's wife or something. It was some sort of exploitative title in order to bring the crowds in. And my favorite part of this movie has to be Paul Naschy, because I watched the documentary first that was on this release, because I was like, I need to know a whole lot more about Paul Naschy, because, and I don't have it in reach, but I've seen his other film, Count Dracula's Great Love. I believe he was in that. But I never really got the allure of Paul Naschy. Paul Naschy is a legendary figure in cult cinema. It's a name that I recognize and that I know, and I've seen one of his movies, Count Dracula's Great Love, and I've never really understood the appeal of him. I understand now, because the documentary lays out all of the issues that he's had throughout his entire life and how much he persevered through those issues and obstacles, such as the Spanish Civil War in the 40s and 50s. And then his issues growing up and wanting to be a filmmaker or an actor, and his parents, not his dad, but he says his mom did not want him at all to be an actor and thought it was a waste of time, wanted him to finish his degree in architecture, all sorts of things. And they also talk about how he was never really given a big budget. He always had to raise it sort of himself, and all sorts of obstacles that he had to deal with. And getting that context of his entire life from when he was born to his death in 2007, I believe, this movie and this documentary really gives a lot of context to why this movie in particular is so important, because this movie was made during the time of the dictatorship under dictator Franco. Not just Franco, a different Franco. And film was heavily censored around this time. And horror films were really the only genre that they were able to have really any sort of criticism towards the dictatorship. And Paul Naschy was so kind of in your face about his critiques about the dictatorship and fascism and so on and so forth. And this is a release that I think is really good. It's really strong. But the movie itself, if you did not watch the documentary, I feel like not many people would enjoy the movie. I thought it was just okay. Maybe I'll rate it 3 stars when I upload this video and log my Letterboxd review, but I think it's the documentary that really holds this release up because that context is very important to enjoy these type of films. Some people can jump into these slow burn, weirdly structured, weirdly acted, weird music, so on and so forth, that is ripe in the 70s exploitation genre. A lot of people can just enjoy it without any context uh, and all of that. For me, I need that context. I need to know why this movie was made. And we get all of the answers in the documentary. And the documentary is not a new one. It was made back in 2010, just a few years after the death of Paul Naschy. And this movie in particular, they mention a lot during that documentary because this was sort of his biggest successful film. And it was also a pretty kind of watershed film for Paul Naschy because this was sort of the first movie that he really stepped forward in the actor's chair because they needed to find somebody who was a lead for a different film or for this one. They mentioned a lot of films that he was in during the documentary, but they talk about how he would he mostly just wanted to work as an art director. He wanted to design the sets, design the feel of the film, the look of it, the aesthetics. And in one of the first films that he made, he showed up and they were like, yeah, we need an actor right now. And we have an entire stack of pictures of all these different actors. We need somebody now. And Paul Naschy was like, I'll do it. Fuck it. And so he did it. And then when they were making the film, they were like, well, you gotta change your name. Your name of Jacinto Molina is not really a name that grabs people. And so he was like, all right, I'll come up with the name. And they said, you have 30 minutes. And so he was looking around the room, saw St. Paul VI, I believe, that one of the actors says in the documentary, says he saw it, was like, okay, my name is Paul. And then he was kind of thinking about what his last name would be. He had a friend named Nahi, Nagy, I believe is the spelling, and he was like, I'm going to turn it into Naschy. So his name, Paul Naschy, is not really his real name. As I've said many times, his real name is Jacinto Molina. And he's the best part of this movie, in my opinion. He is very dedicated to the role. He wears the makeup really well. Every now and then, when you watch these type of movies with werewolves or vampires or really anything with heavy makeup, it's quite noticeable when the actor is uncomfortable. And Paul Naschy does not have any issues while in the makeup. It's as if he's really the werewolf. And he's in this movie quite a bit. I think I did read the synopsis for this film during the unboxing, so I won't go into the story of it, but it's a very simple Dracula story mixed in with werewolves. And it's not really a werewolf versus vampire woman. It's not what this cover promises, which is, sort of a battle. The werewolf is reaching out. The women are being preyed upon, and they turn into vampires by the midpoint of the film, which I really love. Those portions where we see the two women, the original vampire who was in the castle with Paul Naschy, we see her turning a tourist woman into a vampire, and they both start kind of roaming the countryside together. And there are some really great sequences with them both, where it goes into like 25 frames a second into slow motion, and they have this really eerie, atmospheric music. And I really enjoyed those parts a lot. Those were my favorite parts. Everything with Paul Naschy, of course, was great, but this movie at times felt very stop and go, which was kind of my main issue about this movie. I mean, it's good. I did not feel as if I wasted my time at all, especially when I consider the documentary. But the movie itself, I don't know if I'll ever watch again. I had a pretty good time watching it. I was getting distracted though because it was just so slow, and there were times where I'm like, what is going on? I don't care about what's going on, so I would just go on my phone and just hang out, basically. And that's sort of one detriment of the movie, but it's not really their fault because it's very low budget. Paul Naschy just used whatever he could when making his films. And this is not directed by Paul Naschy. There's only a handful, I think 9 to 11 films on Letterboxd of films that he has directed. But he has starred in over 100 films. So he's definitely more of an actor, not as much of a director, but his acting is just so great. He has so much charisma. He's fucking ripped. He was a bodybuilder for most of his life, and even began competitions and would win championships and become the strongman of Spain. And so I really enjoyed all of that. It really adds to his presence on screen because he's really big. I mean, he's taller than a lot of the actresses in the film. He has big muscles on his arms. He has a big chest. He's very hot, I'll admit. He's a very good-looking man, and it really adds to his presence, as I've said. He's just really great in this. I'm definitely more interested in Paul Naschy. I know Severin and I believe Mondo Macabro have done a lot of Paul Naschy releases, so I'll keep my eye out for that. But this solves a little bit of a blind spot kind of area of cinema that I just didn't know about, which is Paul Naschy. Paul Naschy is a giant in the cult cinema sphere, and this movie and the documentary really helped me to understand it. But the movie itself, I just don't care about. And I feel really bad for it because it's not a bad movie at all. It just wasn't my jam. But there's not much else that I really want to talk about. The slipcover feels really slick. It's probably the slickest of the slipcovers that Vinegar Syndrome has done. But yeah, pretty good release. I enjoyed it. Obviously, I don't have an hour and a half worth of notes to talk about. I'm sure I could if I really go deep into the life of Paul Naschy and going from all the way to his birth, all the way to his death. But I didn't really want to do that when the documentary exists. So that is it for today. I'm going to do probably not Blood Dino. What's that movie? Blood Delirium. I think I'll do that one next. That way I can leave the Christmas themed film for last. That way I'm getting as close to Christmas as I can before I watch that. But I hope you guys enjoyed this. Let me know if you've seen this movie, and if you haven't, I hope I didn't convince you not to watch it. I think it's worth the time, especially with the documentary. It's on the disc. Watch it. You paid for it. So yeah, have a great rest of the night.